Hello? 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 Okay, good. Okay. Hello, are we there? Welcome, students. Welcome. The network has been very, very chubby, has thrown us out a number of times. So now I have decided to use my own system as hotspots. So I believe we can run through this Zoom class successfully from now. So back to our class, I said I was sharing my screen. I will not go over what I said earlier in the introduction. So I was sharing my screen to where we are starting today. But I make a promise that we will take time and go over the slides before this one. But today, I just want us to move on a little so that we don't spend all the time. I have a video already, which I hope to share with all of you so that you can play that video. And when you have questions in the next class, you can come in and ask your questions. So this is basically a visualized block diagram of your hardware. So we've discussed the output devices and input devices, and we discussed a little of memory, but not in depth, a little bit of storage, but today I want us to move to the CPU. So here on the next slide, you can see what is the CPU. Basically, we say the CPU, the central processing unit, is the brain of the computer. Why call it the brain of the computer? Because that is where every information is processed. The data, what comes in as input, the data, instructions, and everything that comes in as input into the computer system is processed in the CPU and by the CPU. Now the CPU, for the CPU to work effectively, it has two other basic, or I should say technical units. The first one is the control unit, and then the second is arithmetic logic unit. Then the third one, which is not technical, a technical unit, is the internal memory. You'll understand why I had to do a little bit of differentiating the first two from the last three, the last one, the third one. Okay, now the control unit is the unit that directs every operation of the CPU, while the ALU, that's arithmetic logic unit, is the unit that carries out all the manipulations, whether they are arithmetic or logical manipulations. And then the internal memory is there to temporarily hold data and instruction while the CPU is working. Now, all three parts are stored on an electronic device called microchip, or simply called the chip. In our last class, I talked a little bit about the chip, then I left it for you as an assignment to go and read through so that we don't waste too much time. But like I did promise earlier, of course, we will go back and touch them because we don't want any of you to be disadvantaged as much as possible. Now, the microchip, as I was sharing in the last class, is a very tiny chip, like the size of a small postage stamp. Okay, and it is where all the electronic circuits, all the power, the electronic power of the system are etched, E-T-C-H-E-D, etched on the chip, etched on it, so that everything that the system needs to function is right there on that microchip. Elements of the chip are transistors. So what makes up this chip? They are transistors connected together in circuits called integrated circuits. So I did say all the electronic circuits needed for the functioning of the computer are all etched on the microchip. Now, registers are high-speed memory devices located in the ALU to hold data. So apart from just having the microchip, there are also registers. Okay, we'll get to see some of them as we go on. Now, on the next slide, you can see the signal flow. How do signal flow? How do electronic signal flow in the CPU? Now, looking at this, you can see this is the control unit. This is the arithmetic logic unit. This is internal memory. This box here represents the input units. And this box on the other hand here represents the output unit. But going from one unit to the other are these lines, these thick lines, arrowed lines. You can see the first one goes from control unit to the output unit. Another one goes from the control unit to the memory, internal memory. Another one goes from the control unit to the secondary storage. And another one goes from the control unit to the input unit. Now, these arrows that are brown in color are the indicates the flow, the control flow. That is how the signals, that how they control the various other units. So remember we said, and okay, there's still another one that goes from the same control unit to the arithmetic logic unit. Now this is indicating that the control units, as we said earlier in the previous slide, controls every operation that takes place in the computer. Every operation that takes place in the CPU, and of course the computer, because the CPU, the operations of the CPU control everything else in the computer. So you can see the control flow. Oh God. Hello, Ali. Yes, what happened? You're not hearing me? Uh-oh. Okay. All right. Okay. Are you all in now? Oh no, internet is unstable. Okay, students, you are all welcome. Before your class rep called me, I was sharing my screen. I was talking about the central processing unit, which is the key part of the hardware, computer hardware. So I will go back right now to share my screen where I left it off. Okay, so here we are. This is where we started for today's class, talking about the visual block diagram of your computer hardware. And then we went on here to describe a little of what the CPU is. And then here we are right now, talking about the signal flow. How do signals flow in the CPU? We first established that the control unit is the brain of your computer, the brain of the CPU. That is where every input that comes in as data or instruction. Somebody is writing on my screen. Students, please stop writing on the screen. Don't write on the screen. Thank you. So the control unit, being the brain, controls everything. You know, the human brain has compartments. So the CPU, being the brain of the computer itself, has 3 compartments or 3 elements or 3 parts that forms it. Now, the first is the control unit, the second is the ALU, arithmetic logic unit, and the third one is the internal memory. But I said technically, it is the control unit and the ALU that are the main parts of the CPU. Why do I say so? The internal memory is there just to assist in holding data and instruction during processing. So the main 2 guys that do all the work are the control unit and the ALU. Okay. Now, for the control unit to do its work of managing or directing the operations of the CPU, it must use some control signals. And what you see in blue, these lines you see, these arrow lines you see in yellow, sorry, did I say yellow? In brown color are these control signals. These are the control signals. So you can see the control unit controls the output. It controls the ALU, the arithmetic logic unit. You can see the arrow here from control unit to the ALU. You can see it here. It controls also the internal memory. You can see the arrow. It also controls the secondary storage and it controls the input. Now, when we say control, it uses some signals to effect this control, okay? Now, I will use an example to explain, but I think I can just explain it since you are looking at the diagram. It will make better sense. Now, assuming that you are typing, you are typing something on your keyboard or you are pressing your mouse, clicking your mouse, you will see a flow of instruction. That's the yellow line, the yellow arrow. We flow from the input device which is either your keyboard, your mouse, or any other input device. And then it will flow into the internal memory here. And the essence is that internal memory is going to store that input to store it only for the time that it takes the CPU to process that input. Now, so input comes in from here, it flows through this yellow yellow instruction flow, that's instruction signal, it flows through here into the internal memory, and it says, the system is saying, keep this. So that instruction or data is stored temporarily in the internal memory. Okay, now keep that with you because I'm using this diagram to explain a lot of things. Now, look again at, oh no. Good, thank you. Look again, there's another arrow, yellow still, going up from internal memory now to the control unit. What is this arrow saying? It's leaving, remember that the data and the instruction that came as input has been stored in the internal memory. Now the internal memory has to signify or signal, it has to signal the control unit that I have received some input. That is what this arrow does. This arrow is the signal, the arrow, the signal flow going from internal memory, signaling the control unit that some input has come in. So the internal memory is reporting that I have received some input and I'm keeping it for processing. So now, what happens? The control unit receives this signal from the internal memory. Then what does the control unit do? The control unit, look at this brown arrow going down. The control unit now signals the arithmetic and logic units. And what does the signal say? Hello, Alu, there is some input that has come in. It is being held in the internal memory. And of course, the address where it is held will also be given. That address would have been supplied by the internal memory. This signal that goes up here would have reported that I have received some inputs and it is stored inside the memory. The address where it is stored is so and so. If it is stored in address block or instruction block with address, maybe 100 or 20, it will report all of that to the control unit. Now the control unit would signal the ALU with the same information that the internal memory had signaled the control unit. So it will now signal the ALU to say, ALU, get ready for action. Check, go into the internal memory and check the data that has been stored there and some instruction. Check what they are so that we can do the processing. So now, ALU receives this signal from control unit and then goes into action by this white arrow. This white arrow is the one that the ALU uses, is the signal flow from ALU to the memory. What is it saying? It's saying, now I'm coming into internal memory. I have the address, goes there, check to exactly that address, then it will pick the input that came in, then the ALU will check to know what it is. I remembered when we had our physical class, before you guys were asked to now go and prepare for Zoom. Then when we had that class, I did explain about decoding, interpreting and decoding. So that's what sorry, I'm trying to admit some people into the class. Some new people just came in. You're welcome. Okay. So that is what the arithmetic and logic unit does here. It picks the inputs checks what they are. Is it data? Is there instruction? What is the instruction saying? Now, supposing the instructions is saying multiply two numbers, and the two numbers are stored in address this in the memory. Now, it's the duty of the ALU to check this internal memory, go into that address where the two numbers have been stored. It will pick the two numbers and then swing into action, return into its own unit here, that's the ALU, and begin to do the multiplication. So that's, I've explained so far. Input comes in and it flows, and you can see the signal flow from input device to the CPU is slow. Why? Because there is human intervention. A human being is there. And you know, we human beings, we don't work as fast as a computer. So that's why this signal flow is slow. But it goes into the internal memory, drops the input, whatever it is. The internal memory will now signal the control unit through this arrow. This arrow is a faster one. It's faster than the one coming from input. So it signals the control unit and tells the control unit that it has received data and the message of instruction. And then the control unit now signals the arithmetic and logic unit, which goes into the internal memory to fetch the data along with the instructions and then begin the processing. So I've just showed you in brief what happens there. Now let's look at the other one. The other one, after the processing, what happens? Now remember, there is this arrow here, this arrow between the arithmetic logic and the memory are two-sided. It's a two-sided arrow, two-headed. It points up, it points down. So when it goes down is when the ALU is sending a signal into the internal memory to fetch the data and the instruction. Now, and then it goes back up to now do all the calculation and processing. Now, when it is done processing, the same ALU will return into the internal memory through this same signal flow. It will signal again that I'm done. I've finished this processing. I've done the arithmetic. I've done the calculation. Now here is the result. Internal memory, receive it and store it. So that's why you have this arrow pointing up and down. Now, you can see also the arrow coming from control units. Remember that the internal memory had signaled the control unit used through this yellow arrow. Oh, admit. You guys are coming so late. All right. So the control unit also, through this brown arrow, will signal the internal memory and instruct the internal memory on how it should release this data and instruction to the arithmetic and logic units. So you see, if you critically study this diagram, it tells you at a glance what happens inside the CPU. It's a very well organized system. No unit works carelessly. No unit works haphazardly. Every unit works based on the signal it received from the other units. So if the control unit has not signaled the arithmetic logic unit, the arithmetic logic unit will not start its operation. If the control unit also does not signal the internal memory may just hold the data and instruction and not be ready to release it. Also, the control unit, okay, where did I stop? I said after processing, again, there is a flow. Actually, in real sense, there's supposed to be this arrow coming down from control unit to ALU is supposed to also, there's supposed to be another one going up. There's an error here. Please, in your notes, if you print your notes out, please mark this arrow. It's a double-headed arrow. The same way the control unit signals arithmetic logic unit. When the arithmetic logic unit finishes the processing, it must report back to the control unit. So an arrow must go back up to the control unit to signal to say, I have finished. The arithmetic logic unit has finished the processing. So when that is done, then the control unit now will pick the signal and send to, it can send to either of two devices or two units. One, it can signal to the output. You see the arrow going to the output. It signals to the output to say, now, here is the result of the processing. We are done working. This is the result. And if the user, you and I, the user, you are sitting in front of your screen, you will see the output on your screen. That's one. Now, the second thing the control unit will do after the processing is that it could also place a signal to the secondary storage. But listen very carefully. Before it will do that, it will first of all go into the internal memory and check what the next instruction is. Students, remember, the first is that input came in, data and instruction. And I gave an example. This instruction is saying, computer, multiply these two numbers. And these two numbers have been entered by the user, maybe 150 times 2.53. These are the two numbers. Oh. Okay. All right. Now, the processing is done. Okay. Now, the next thing is, what do I do with the results of processing? Before, as I was saying, before the control unit will signal the secondary storage, it must first of all check what is the next instruction. You know, as a user, your instruction could be save to USB flash, save to my flash, or save it onto a CD, or save it to the hard disk. So if that is the next instruction, now remember, after processing, the result is shown on the output device. That is this arrow that comes to output, coming from control unit, okay? Now, the next is, what is the next instruction? If you are saying the user instruction is saying store or save the result of the processing, then the control unit will now move from, will now signal, that's how you see the arrow going down to signal to the secondary storage, which could be your disk, hard disk, or your flash, or your CD, or whichever type of storage medium you want to use. So it will signal it, and once it has signaled it, remember that result is still temporarily in the internal memory. That is when, after it is signaled, okay, it's time to store, then a signal flow will flow from the internal memory down to the storage device. At this point, this is when you save your work. Your work or whatever you have done is now saved onto a secondary storage device. So this is what happens here. So we have the first, the green is flow of data. Data goes in. We know two things can happen from as inputs. It's either data or instruction. The yellow line is flow of instructions. So two things are entering into the system. You have the data and then you have the instruction. Now, from the internal memory, the instruction, it signals to the control unit that I have received instruction and I have stored it, and then the control unit now goes on to signal the ALU. I think we have stayed enough on this. And now finally, you have a flow, a data flow from internal memory to the output device. What happens here? I didn't explain this. After the control unit signals the output device, maybe your monitor, the signal is get ready to receive output, get ready to receive output. Remember, the same control unit had signaled the internal memory to release the output at this juncture to the output device. So you see this green arrow going to the output device. So with this, I think we can move on. If anybody does not understand, oh my God. I'm in class. How are you? Evenings. You went. Okay. Somebody can hear? All right. Good. Sorry, everybody. Students, you are there. Sorry, the network was out. Yes, it was network. Okay, let's go back to the screen. Please unmute yourself. Yes, I will unmute you. Unmute yourself so that there's no noise in the class. Who is that person? Okay, now let's go back to the slide. I can see we are still here. Welcome back. Now, let's discuss the control unit. I have said a lot. Now, from what I have said, we'll use what I have said in illustration to explain this slide 65. How can you explain the control units? Remember, I used two words. I said is the unit that directs everything that takes place in the CPU. It's like the manager, okay? Now, what is its job? What is the function? The control unit is responsible for three things: fetching, decoding, and executing instructions stored in the internal memory of the computer. I believe you all understand this because I took time to explain. Okay? It will fetch the instruction. It will decode. Decoding means interpret it. Find out what this instruction is saying. What does instruction require the computer to do? So once it has decoded, then it will go on to ensure that those instructions are executed. The control unit begins this execution process by going through the following steps. So these are the steps it follows. Number one, it will fetch the instruction from internal memory and store it in a register. Now, what is a register? In one of the slides, I'll just go back up a little. here in this slide, slide 61, we say registers are high-speed memory devices that are located in the ALU, in the arithmetic logic unit, to hold data. Now, the memory unit holds data, yes, coming directly from the input device. But when the data has been fetched by the control unit, it is handed over to the arithmetic logic unit and held in the register. The register is a storage area, a storage device, small area that is used to store data inside the ALU. Now, the essence is for speed, to enhance the speed of the computer, of the processing. Now, the next step that the control unit must follow is to decode the instruction and then have data sent to the ALU when necessary. I have explained what decoding means. Then the commands, the control unit will then command the ALU to carry out the decoded instruction using the data received, and then send results of the ALU operations back to internal memory. I explained all of that from the slide 64. And then when that is done, it will continue with the process as outlined until all instructions are carried out. So I'm going back here, that these arrows we saw earlier, all I explained earlier, if there are 10 instructions in the internal memory, if there are 10 instructions from the input device with their requisite data, the control unit will continue all of the fetch, decode, execute. It will do that for the 10 instructions. It will keep going. It's like a circle. It will keep going until all the instructions have been executed. And it's only after that that it will move on. That's why your computer can work the whole day, because as instructions come, it is, fetching and decoding and executing. The next unit is the ALU. I've also explained so much about it, but I'll run through the slide as I usually do with you. The ALU is responsible for performing arithmetic and logical operations. So what are these arithmetic operations? The same arithmetic operations you know: addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and if there's any other arithmetic and logic unit, we do it, we handle it. Even when you are doing square roots and all of that, this ALU will handle all of them. Now, the other one is comparison operations. Comparison operations are operations, they are logical in nature, like greater than, equal to, less than. Now, assuming in the last example I gave, after multiplying the two numbers, another instruction now said, compare, check whether are these two numbers greater than 50. Are they greater than 50? If yes, add it to the list of students that passed. That's an instruction. So now that this aspect of the instruction is the logical aspect, and the system, the ALU will also do that. It will check whether the number it has multiplied is greater than or less than 50. And once it has it does the comparison, whatever is the result, it will now move on to do the next instruction, which is add it to a particular list, and so on. Okay, now the other operation is a logical. These ones are purely logical operations. They are logical operations that use pure logic. You have and, or, not. You may not understand this at this level, but there is a course you do later where you have these logical operations explained in detail. But for now, just know them as it is. Okay, now this is program execution, all that I've explained. This is a block diagram that makes it a lot easier to understand. See, this is how program is executed. The control unit, your ALU, the memory, as usual, as you saw earlier in the other diagram. So the first is to fetch instruction. And who is doing this? Control unit is fetching the instruction, fetching it from memory. The second thing that it does is to decode the instructions. Decode. Who is doing this? Control unit. Then the third thing is the control unit to command the ALU. It will send a signal. Now, sorry, students, what I've been calling signal, they are also equivalent to commands. You can call them command signals. Signals that tell the other unit what to do. So they are commands. So it will send a command to send data to ALU. So the ALU receives the data, and then ALU does the execution of the instruction. And then ALU, after that, the results are returned, sent back to internal memory for storage. Students, I think I've overflogged this. I believe everybody understands. There's no one that shouldn't, because I've really overflogged this. Okay, let's move on to system clock. What is the system clock? Oh no. Internet not unstable, not stable. Okay. The system clock, now, every computer has a clock inside it. That clock is called the system clock. It's found also inside the system box or the system unit or the system case, as which name you choose to call it. Now, what is the work of this system clock? It synchronizes every operation. Synchronize. That is, it helps all the operations of the computer to be in sync, to be in harmony. It helps the computer operations to be done in harmony. So there'll be no part that is working and then forgetting the other. Everything is done in sync, in harmony, okay? And that's because of the clock. Each tick is called a clock cycle. Faster clock means that the CPU can execute more instructions per second. So if you have a very fast clock, fast system clock, the implication is that your CPU can execute plenty, very many instructions per second, in 1 second. Now, this speed is measured in MHz, as a megahertz per second. That is 1 million ticks of the system clock. Okay, so when the system clock ticks 1 million times, you have one measure of the speed. You can say, oh, this is how fast it is. Okay, let's look at the memory. Let's look at the memory. The computer's memory, which we have been talking about, that's the internal memory. It's also called the main memory. It's also called the primary memory. But in your manual, those diagrams I showed you, either you see it as majorly internal memory or main memory. But see, any of these names apply to that same memory, that memory that is attached in the CPU. It is connected alongside the control unit, ALU, and then we have the memory. And I've explained the use. It is used to store data instructions and information. For example, the operating system and other system software, application programs, data being processed by application programs, they are all stored in that internal memory. Now, students, I want you to understand. We're going to see how are they stored, because I did say earlier that the internal memory is used to store your data temporarily while the computer is working. But I will explain why will it also allow you to store operating system and some specific system software. Why? We'll get to know that later. Now, what other thing that is stored there? Bytes. Bytes are stored at specific locations or addresses. What do we mean by bytes? A storage, a unit of storage. That is, bytes of information or bytes of data are stored at specific locations or addresses. I mentioned to you before that whatever is stored in the memory must have an address. Now, the memory is organized in sections, or what I could call blocks or cell. Just imagine imagine when you go to bank. Yeah, this is a good example. When you go to the bank, you want to enter the bank, and now because they will not allow you go in with your handbag or with any bag, they have a box in front of the bank where they ask you to keep your whatever you are having that cannot pass the door. You keep it there and lock. Now, each of those boxes has number. So when you lock, you go in with the key of the key to that box where you have kept your bag. Now, it is the same way that the storage locations in the memory are organized. They are organized in cells or blocks like that. So whatever is stored has an address, a number that the control unit and the ALU will always use to know where to fetch the data or the instruction. So that's about bytes. And they are stored in units of storage called bytes. A byte is 1 kilogram. Don't worry, we'll get to it. Now, the next thing, I said I will explain why is it that we are not storing only data or instruction temporarily. There are some other things you can store in internal memory. The reason is because there are two primary types of internal memory, two primary types. One is the ROM, R-O-M, read only memory. And the other one is the RAM, R-A-M, which is random access memory, so that I don't repeat myself too many times. Let's go to the next slide, then I'll explain. The read-only memory, ROM, is a fast memory whereby storage is accomplished by permanent switches in a chip. Information that is stored is permanent and cannot be erased or modified. Contents are not lost when the computer is turned off. So I'll explain 1, 2, 3 before I go to the next one. Okay, now the read-only memory. I want you to imagine the memory as a box. Imagine it as a box divided into two. One part is the read-only memory. The other part is the random access memory. Now, the random access memory, sorry, we are looking at read-only, forgive me. The read-only memory is a part of the internal memory that you and I, we don't have access to as users. You can't access it. That is why the first point says that storage is accomplished by permanent switches in a chip. At the point of manufacture, the manufacturers, you know, store the things that are to be in ROM by permanently switching them there on the chip. I've explained what a chip is. So it is, they are permanently hardwired. That's another word I can use. Permanent storage, okay? So whatever is stored in ROM remains in ROM. You cannot take it away, you can't delete it, you cannot add your own onto what is in ROM. So that is point 1 and 2. Now, point 3 is also follows point 1 and 2. Why do I say so? The content of ROM can never be lost when the computer is turned off. We call this attribute non-volatility. Non-volatility. ROM is non-volatile, or in a simpler English, read-only memory is not volatile. It's not volatile. It doesn't lose data. It doesn't lose its contents. It does not. Okay. I like to use a human instance to explain this, but maybe when I get to RAM, I will use that example so that then you can understand what we mean by non-volatile and what we mean by volatile, okay? When something is volatile, it's the opposite of non-volatile. So I will explain that later. Now, the fourth point under ROM is that ROM usually contains instructions that allows users' programs to begin after system is powered on. That is what is called bootstrapping. The instruction that allows your program as a user to bootstrap after the system is powered on is stored in ROM. These are the sensitive instructions. Remember at this point, if you remember, I said, I'm going back a little. Under ROM, two types of, okay, here, this example where we said operating system and other system software are stored in ROM. And I said, I will explain why. And that is what we are talking about here. So the operating system, you know, when you on your system will boot. That booting process, the information, the instructions that causes your system to start up, to boot, that's bootstrap. Those instructions are stored in ROM, okay? Instructions on ROM are referred to as firmware. Why? Because the manufacturer bound the instruction sets on the chip, and this is called BIOS chip, basic input output system chip. So the chip that makes up the ROM chip is the BIOS chip, and it is bound in by the manufacturer. I explained that before, so this is just for emphasis. The part of the ROM called the ROM BIOS, that's basic input output system, is what starts a computer. It allows the microprocessor to control data between the RAM and input output devices such as keyboard, monitor, printer, modem, disk drives, etc. Now, students, as you can see the name BIOS, ROM BIOS. BIOS means basic input output system. So everything that concerns the input and the output, all the instructions that your computer requires to control your input devices like your keyboard, your mouse, and so on, your output device like your printer, and so they are all stored in the ROM BIOS. That is why there are times if your keyboard has a problem and you switch on your computer, after as it's booting, it will give you a report. It will tell you that there is keyboard error. If you have never seen it before, maybe you are a computer person now, maybe one day as you work with computers, you will see it a lot, where if your keyboard has keyboard error, and what is it saying? Check that error. Once you correct it, then the BIOS will now be able to communicate with your keyboard. Sometimes it could be your mouse. Maybe the BIOS, the system cannot communicate. It can't see your mouse. You know, you remember the mouse. It can't see the mouse. And it's saying, oh, mouse error, mouse error. So what do you do at that point? You check. You may want to print to send your work to printer, and it gives you a message and tells you that printer is not ready, or it tells you there's no printer. But on your table, you can see a printer. Why is your computer saying there's no printer? Because the BIOS cannot identify the printer. There's no communication between your system and the printer. So all of the information, or rather the instructions that are required for the system, your CPU, to communicate with either your printer, your keyboard, your mouse, or any other peripheral are all stored in the ROM. Does that make sense now, students? I believe so. All right. Don't worry, when we are done, if you have questions, you ask, but I want to try and run as fast as possible. Now, this same read-only memory, who is that? Somebody unmute yourself. Unmute yourself, thank you. There are different forms of ROM. Basically, we have them as 3 forms. We have the PROM, the EPROM, and then EEPROM. Now, already you know what ROM is. You know that ROM cannot be changed. ROM, once you put information, you store anything in ROM, it is there permanently. Now, when does ROM become a PROM? Programmable ROM. PROM, PROM, or programmable ROM. This kind allows the user to program initial instructions into that ROM. So you can program, store initial instructions, bond in the instructions as into the chips. There will be special instructions. So the user programs it, does it, bonds it in. But now when I say the user, it's not necessarily you or I. At the point maybe of manufacture, the user, if the user has, you are able to maybe make special order. You can say, this is what I want, bond this into the ROM, and it will be programmed into it for you. That's a type of ROM if you have a PROM, okay? Now, if you have an EPROM, the E there means erasable programmable ROM, which means that initial instruction that has been bound into the ROM can be erased. This form of ROM is such that allows the initial, oh no, sorry students, network issue, oh, we are back. It allows you to, you know, what has been programmed can be erased. But remember, it's a form of ROM. You don't find, it's not all ROM that comes in this way, okay? Now, how is it erased? It is erased using ultraviolet ray or ultraviolet light. So there is some light intensity that will be subjected onto the PROM that will erase what has been programmed into it. So when it is erased, then it can be reprogrammed another set of instructions can now be programmed into that ROM. Okay, that's if it is an EEPROM that you have. Now, the other one is EEPROM. An EEPROM is an electrically erasable ROM, which means you don't need ultraviolet ray or intense light to erase the content of that kind of ROM. You need electricity. Example is flash BIOS. This ROM can be rewritten through the use of a special software program. Okay. The last story here is bubble memory used in RAM to avoid volatility. Now, this point is not supposed to be here, but bubble memory is we can say it's a technology that is used to help RAM. If you do not, if you have you place a special order for your RAM not to be volatile, then that RAM must make use of bubble memory. So let's move to random access, then you will understand better. RAM, random access. Number one, as the name implies, random access. Random access. Anybody can access it. Anybody can store anything he or she wants into RAM. You can store it, anything, store it at any time, any point in time, no problem, okay? Storage is said to be volatile. Now we are back to that word, volatile. Because items on RAM disappear when power is turned off. Now, your laptop, those of you that have laptop, you may not experience what we are saying, because when your laptop battery has charged and you disconnect it from power source, whatever you are doing, the battery charge will keep your RAM going. But if you happen to use a desktop and the desktop does not have a UPS, uninterrupted power supply device connected to it, once NEPA takes off their lights, your system goes off. And the moment your system goes off, everything you were working on will disappear. Now, I want to explain in detail. Even if I don't read down this, you can read by yourself. Now, RAM, remember I told you to visualize internal memory as a box divided into two, a storage box divided into two parts. One part is where sensitive instruction is stored, that's your ROM. And that part of the internal memory, you and I don't tamper with it. You don't access it, but you can use what is stored. If operating system is stored, you can use the operating system to help you do your work, but you can't change what is inside, okay? Now, this other side, which is the RAM, is a part of the storage box where when you on your computer, that part is open to you and I. So another name I usually call it is the working memory. Working, W-O-R-K, working memory, W-O-R-K-I-N-G. That's the memory that is given to you to use whenever you are working on your computer. Anytime you are working, RAM is made available to you, okay? So if you understand that, it will help us in anything else I'm going to explain. Now, because RAM is made available to you, remember where we are coming from. The slide where I took time to explain that diagram, the flow and all of that, I kept on mentioning that internal memory is used to store data and instruction temporarily. The temporariness means that only while your system is on, only while you are working, The moment you switch off and go, RAM is shut down and RAM is emptied. See, now understand again that when your computer is not working, RAM is empty. RAM is always empty. The only time RAM contains anything is when you on your computer and begin to work. So it is used temporarily just to assist you to do your work. Now, take it as, again, for those of you who go to play football, assuming a football field is also used as a market, assuming, I'm just assuming. Now, anytime you want to play football, everything, all the gadgets, all the pano and everything in the market is taken away, and the place is open as a football field. But whenever you are not playing football, all the market people will come back and use the place to play, to do their selling. Now, that is one way you can see this, but it's not exactly like that. But if you can look at it as RAM is empty, just take it like that. RAM is empty, nothing is inside the RAM. Anytime your computer is switched off, RAM is empty, nothing is there. But the moment you switch on your computer, RAM is switched on and released to you to store whatever you type, whether data or instruction. Okay, so it's stored there, and then the result of processing is also stored there until you are ready to stop. Whenever you are ready, when you save your work, the work is not saved into RAM. I explained that when I explained that diagram earlier. Your work is explained into storage, secondary storage, which is either your flash disk or your hard disk or your CD-ROM, or whichever medium you choose, okay? So if we understand that, then I think point number, the temporary data storage device during operation, this one is understood, okay? Now I want to explain volatility. I will say that I like to use what happens to human beings to explain the word volatile. When you say something is volatile, it means that that thing is not stable. It is very, very unstable. Excuse me. Now, imagine you have a friend. You have a friend or a neighbor or a family member who gets angry very easily, very easily. There are many times you are so careful, you don't know what to do so that that person will not get angry. Sometimes you may even say something, maybe you wanted to joke with the person, and that thing becomes a matter. The person is already angry. And when he's angry, everywhere is on fire. You will say, if you are talking in English, you will say, that person has a volatile temper. That person has a volatile temper. That means that person's temper is not stable. See, if you ask the person, maybe when the person is alone, that person may even be asking, hey, why did I even get angry like that? That's because that person has no control over his temper. That's a volatile tempered person. Okay, so if you understand that with human beings, then let's come back to computer. Your RAM is volatile. Your RAM has no control over itself. It can't control protect the content, what is stored inside it. It cannot. The only thing that keeps your RAM, the content of RAM, intact for you is that there is power. There is electricity going into your computer. The moment electricity goes off your computer, the content of RAM goes off. Now, come back to your computer room, your classroom, your lab. Mute yourself, that person, mute yourself. Now, in the computer lab, you know, The systems there don't have UPS. So anytime NEPA goes off, that's the end of work. In the same way, supposing NEPA didn't go off, maybe your classmate stands up, and then as he wanted to move, the leg tripped on the cable, and the cable now, maybe as the leg tripped, that your classmate started to fall, and as he's trying to fall, he's trying to also catch himself. His leg is already pulling the cable, and then the cable pulls from the socket. Just imagine what happens. NEPA is still there, but because the cable has pulled out of the socket, the light that goes into that computer will go off. And of course, as we have explained, the content of RAM will disappear. That's what happens, okay? So that's understood. That's the volatile nature of RAM. Storage, number 3 point. Storage is accomplished by use of flip-flops, which are miniature transistors. Don't worry so much about it, just take it like that. I wouldn't enter into teaching you what flip-flops are, but when you do some courses in electronics, circuitry, you will understand more about flip-flops. Now, RAM chips are smaller in size than processor chips. Now, what does this tell us? RAM is small. The space you have in your RAM is not usually very, very large space. So you can't do, there's a limit to what you can do while you are working in your RAM. And that's why you cannot store things there permanently. If you store today, you store tomorrow, the size, the space is over. You can't have anything. So that's why it is dedicated only for you to use while you work. The chips are packaged on circuit boards called single inline memory modules, SIMs, or dual inline memory modules, DIMMs. Okay. Now, these 2 points are just telling you that your RAM, just as you have the ROM chip, that's the same way you have the RAM chip. RAM chips are small, and the way they are packaged on circuit board called either a SIM or a DIMM, okay? Now, the amount of RAM is discussed in terms of kilobytes, megabytes, and gigabytes. That's storage. Storage capacity, the capacity of RAM. If you are buying a computer, hey, who is there? Please unmute yourself. Thank you. If you are going to buy a computer, the implication of this is you are going to be asking how many kilobytes of RAM, how many megabytes of RAM, how many gigabytes of RAM does this computer have? Now, the implication is if you buy a computer that has very little RAM, you will not be able to do much. There are some programs you will not be able to run. Now you want to develop a software and your RAM size is very small. It can't even accommodate that software you are developing. Then of course you can't develop that software. Sometimes you may want to download something that is quite large. If that thing you want to download is larger than RAM, the RAM where it is coming into, of course you cannot download it. So this helps you to know when you are buying system, you look for the one that the RAM is high enough to accommodate most of what you'll be doing in any computer session, work session you have. The more the RAM, the more programs and files a computer can work on simultaneously. I've explained that. RAM requirements depends on what type of work the computer is to be used for. Also, I have explained that. Okay, now let's go to how is memory measured. Memory measurements. Memory is measured in bits, B-I-T. The basic unit of measurement for memory in a computer is the B-I-T, bit. It is a contraction of two words, binary and digits. Now, if you are seeing my screen that I'm sharing, you will see the binary, the B is bolded. The B in binary is bolded. Then the IT in digit, DIG, the IT, the last two letters is also bolded. So you pick that